Figma is the gold standard of UX and UI tools, which makes it even more surprising that the recent update destroyed their, well, user experience and interface, with a lot of the changes hiding options that were in plain sight before behind unnecessary button clicks. There's been a whole lot of noise around this GUI update, so let's try to clean the app up a bit so we can make our UI designs in peace, starting with the left sidebar. The biggest change here is that Figma decided to use this rounded floating style of sidebar on both the left and right sidebars, and the quick toolbar. Honestly, this wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't for this little sliver of screen above these panels here. It's kind of awkward, like I can't tell if there should be more space there or if it shouldn't be there at all. Let's fix this confusion by just anchoring the sidebars down and getting rid of this space entirely. But first, let's move this toolbar panel to the top of the screen and extend the sidebars vertically so that they take up the sides of the screen to get rid of that weird sliver of space up top and return the profile and share options to where they were before. If you've ever had to rush on a designing project, the last thing you need to give you a headache is trying to figure out where the tools are. Figma did a good job by having two panels where they, in a way, separated the tools to one side panel and navigation actions to the other. But they seem to have left some loopholes which we need to fix, especially on this right panel. I don't know how, but some of the navigation features found themselves here. So let's clean up the right panel to be exclusively for the tools we need for redesigning, and then customize the left panel to be exclusively for navigation purposes. The first buttons that I can identify here are these prototype and design buttons, which are on the right side. But let's not transfer an icon overload to this other panel. What is a better place to put an important icon other than the header? Actually, this position is just perfect because additionally, the prototype and design buttons were right next to the community button, so switching from the community to your design will be simpler and quicker. Speaking of simplicity, the current Figma design has this grayish coloring on a selected tab to show the page that you're currently viewing. It's nice and it's standard. I don't see much wrong with it besides the fact that it could be a little clearer. You know, something that has always puzzled me about how an old design and a new design have the same layout and shape on Figma? What I actually mean is that both the old and new designs have these sharp corner tips which are confusing when you have to identify them with their shapes. I know this should be left for designers to choose what kind of layout they want, but how should I know which design I am working on? To make this less stressful, let's introduce this feature where our new design will have a smoother edge as a default layout, which obviously you can change if you think it doesn't match your design preference. Perfect. Now, do you guys remember how I told you we'd come back to the toolbar? Well, here we are. The problem with the toolbar is that it is placed at the very bottom of the screen. Though you can move it around to any position, let's find a place in a better area where everyone can see and easily use it. This area on the top of the screen looks suitable enough, and instead of having it move around, let's make it fixed to this bar so that it sticks out at the top of the screen. With things looking sleek on this side, let's move to the right side of the screen. Everything looks in place on this side at first glance, but if you look closer, you'll notice something obvious about the right panel. It is very cluttered and loaded with lots and lots of icons and instructions. If you're keen enough, you'll see that some icons have been placed in wrong groups. Anyways, we'll get into that later on. But right now, let's take a look at these buttons, the masking button and the Create Components menu. They are perfectly fine on the right panel by the fact that we had planned to leave that panel exclusively for designing properties. Except I later figured because they are important features of the app and that right panel is so cluttered, we should move these features to a better position on the screen. Like here, right beside the toolbar, where you won't have to look for them very much and can't miss them easily. Awesome. But this right panel still needs some more work. But before we get into that, let's change a few things about this settings button. Did you even know that a settings button existed before this? Probably not. The Figma team probably put this here with the assumption that people will probably rarely use it. But this guy is just as important as any other icon, in my opinion, and that's not even the main reason why I brought it up. The main question, though, is why would you have a settings button with an icon of a question mark? Someone explain it to me. The traditional setting button is the cogwheel icon, so I suppose switching to that would be fair to everyone to use that instead of a question mark. As you've probably noticed, I like most of the important icons at the top of the page, so let's move our settings button up here where it's more visible. Better. Now let's switch the theme into light mode. I can't find the theme options anywhere in the settings button. I literally had to go to Google for the location of the theme and found out that the options are currently in my profile. I really didn't expect this from an app like Figma, and I'm not gonna lie. But don't worry, Figma, no one saw that. Anyways, let's do the expected here and move this feature to the settings where it's supposed to be traditionally. Now let's go back to what we were initially talking about. The right panel looks good with the few changes we have made so far, but we can make it look better. I noticed that there was this teeny tiny space here where I could fix a few things. Install drop-down buttons to these text descriptions too. These drop-down buttons are so cool that I can hide the icons that I think are less useful, and conversely, drop this down to reveal the buttons you want to put to use. This gives the right panel a neater look, and the many icons don't have to lie around the whole place. Let's give the drop-down buttons a go. The position button has these jumbled up loads of icons that I think we should do something about. Let's take this top group of icons and find them a better place on the screen. Since we had created a bit of space earlier, let's find them a separate tab and call it alignment, and obviously not forgetting the drop-down button. You remember how I told you that the app has some faults here and there with the placement of icons according to their function? Well, this is the tab. Firstly, we have this clip content button. According to how I have been using this button, the Clip Content tab relates more to a visual property than a layout structure, in my opinion. So with that in mind, I suppose that is a proper reason why we should remove it from this tab. Luckily, we have the Appearance tab right here, where I can just insert it instead of making a new tab entirely. Make a few changes to how we use this Clip Content button by adding these checklist buttons. Now it requires a single action to use this guy over here, which I suppose is faster and easier to use than what we had on our previous UI design, where we had to initiate a couple of actions. Does this angle button have anything to do with position? I also thought of the same. So I also moved him to the Appearance tab, where I feel it had more sense of belonging. These icons right here on the Appearance tab are pretty much confusing, especially if you're starting out on Figma or even if you're an experienced designer. And this can be quite troubling if you're in a hurry or something. So I added some text descriptions that I thought would help navigate the app better and identify the icons faster. You know, I also had to include this drop-down menu that almost all the other tabs have now. As a UI design app, I think the biggest priority should be getting positive user feedback from your users. But I really doubt if Figma has been getting that after I noticed one UI problem. I noticed that with the current Figma design, some of its features tend to extend over into the spaces of other features, and that might just undermine the user experience. Have a look at this constraint feature. When you click onto it, the icon reveals a tab which extends into the working canvas. And this can just inconvenience users, especially if you're trying to work with both of the features simultaneously. Luckily enough, with the real estate that we had created earlier by debunking a few things here and there in the right panel, I could do something about this. Initially, I had thought of just fitting it into another existing tab, but I later dropped that idea. Alternatively, let's just make it a completely new tab that has its own icons. Did I give it a drop-down menu? Of course I did! Finally, let's add a new feature into this design that I thought would be really helpful in this new Figma design. I haven't given it a name yet, but its function is pretty simple and straightforward. I had removed most floating tools and features, so I added this floating properties toolbar. You can easily use this to change the font size, text style, and you can even select the type of font you want easily. All this with just a simple click of a button. What do you think about this new feature? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, with the redesigned Figma, you now have a huge canvas to make all your designs and good text descriptions on the icons to help you with identifying the icons and buttons.